My channel specifically, Freeze Dried Business, is really growing globally in terms of viewership and audience. And I fortunately was connected to someone all the way out in India, and she runs a company that is growing exponentially in their area as well as across the world. She has a really fascinating story of how they got started in this and really where they're seeing the growth in their freeze dried product. We're going to talk about everything about their story, but also she wanted to ask me some questions too to give her audience and people in India a little bit more perspective about what I'm seeing in freeze drying too. So I'm really excited. Aayushi is from DryM Foods. You can follow her on Instagram. She's got a great following there and lots of great content. Aayushi, why don't you introduce yourself and give us an idea of like where you're at in India and what you're all about in your company?
Thank you so much, David, first of all, for having me on this channel. And it's just amazing to see the work you've been doing in the freeze drying space, educating the larger space. So I had DryM Foods. It's a company started by my mom back in 2017, sorry, when me and my sister were abroad. I was based in LA and my sister was in Edinburgh, and we were just having issues, and we were with food, especially missing mother's food. And that's when we did some research that dehydration and freeze drying are wonderful technologies that could increase the shelf life of food without any preservatives. So that's when the journey started in 2017, and we quickly grew to about, let me do this in pounds, so we quickly grew to about 450 pounds in 2019. And given my mom was alone without any marketing, anything, she sort of put her foot down that, hey, I need partners in this full time as it's a lot to take up. And so me and my husband stepped in. We are three partners in the business today. And as of 2025, we are at 1,100 pounds a day for freeze drying and another 1,000 pounds a day for dehydration.
Wow, 1,100 pounds a day. When I talked to you previously, you actually said that that's on the low end for companies that you're familiar with in India. That's correct?
100%. So because we are focused on cooked food, so that's on the lower end. There are many companies in the state of Gujarat that are doing at least 5 times of this on a daily basis, very focused on raw vegetables and fruits, and they have humongous setups.
When you said you go abroad, and your sister and you were missing your mom's cooking, is that common for anybody who travels out of the country to study and to also go work?
India is very, very diverse culturally, as well as our palates are very diverse. So, what my mom ends up making, say, in New Delhi, that's in North, versus someone who's staying in Bangalore, that's the city of tech, or even Hyderabad, that's also down south. Uh, it's absolutely different how we make lentils in each household of India. So the masalas we use, the spices we use actually vary by the house. So everyone misses it. And once you go abroad, it's not just abroad, once you go away from home, especially when you are under 25, right? Your whole focus is on studies, on growing career wise. And making Indian food is, of course, easy, but it requires you to have some sort of groceries, all these masalas. So having freeze dried food with you, where you're just adding hot water and you're good to go on a meal in 10 minutes, is like heaven. So we provide this space, at least at DryM Foods, where your mother brings in food and we freeze dry it. It can be as low as even 1 pound of just lentils of 10 types, vegetables of 10 types. We freeze dry them, and the kid actually ends up eating their mother's food while studying anywhere in the world.
That's fantastic. I was going to ask you, what are the products that you started with, and then what are you doing today to give people an idea?
We started with lentil and rice combos mainly because lentils and rice do very well and they are a full meal finally. So we started with about 5 products, and at this point, we are at 80 plus products. Where we are even doing fun things like chutneys. We are, of course, doing freeze-dried fruits, so freeze-dried strawberries, pineapples, which are very common globally. So they are fun snacking options. And just a few things. So we even started. I have a product here. We even started things like toddler. A whole toddler menu because globally people have started introducing salt after the age of 1 or 2, and that's where we started a toddler menu. That if you're traveling abroad with your kid, it becomes easy to give them these lentil-based, salt-free meals. So just experimenting a lot, but it's all because of freeze drying. I think I would like to take this sort of point to even go back to you and have you talk about just technology overall, how freeze drying as a technology has evolved over the years, and how you have seen the shift in it globally.
I don't profess to be this expert in freeze drying, but we all kind of started in the same, I would say, kind of era that you started a little bit earlier than me. But here in the United States, the home freeze dryer that Harvest Right developed really it gave accessibility for myself to someone brand new to figure out what freeze drying was. And what I found was that it was changing something into a different texture. It was actually enhancing the flavor of things that previously maybe seemed a little bit too dry, or things that you didn't think were going to actually, as a dried product, really taste well. And also, I also I wanted to prove the fact that was it really true that the nutrition value would actually remain at a high level, given that I'm familiar with dehydration. My mom actually, growing up, we were homeschooled in our house, and we did a lot of different canning, and went to local farms and orchards here in Boise, Idaho, to go and do those things. And so canning and preservation was very common in my household growing up, so freeze drying wasn't really there. But it's also if it's done the right way, it's a very clean way to preserve the food, because you're really not letting a whole lot of the atmosphere, uh, inside the chamber. It's actually through a vacuum. So when you actually get the vacuum at a certain pressure, there is no extra outside, air or oxygen going in there, and so you're not susceptible to any type of environment that possibly could impact the food. And that's the case with all types of freeze dryers. And I think you could venture to say there's all different types now that are coming out. And but the important thing is that it's getting better, and the technology is adapting to all the people getting into freeze drying. So controlling the food safety on a fruit freeze dryer is becoming a very common trend here.
And to say that even government wise in India, so the Ministry of Food Processing is actually investing in freeze drying and dehydration, where they are putting out grants where one could actually get money, loans from basically the government to have these machines on their farms. So that way, so the larger concept being there's no wastage of what is produced on farms, and what is sold, what is not sold is dried and has a better shelf life that can be used in so many areas.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually something that I really see all countries kind of doing. In the United States, it takes just organization. You have to be a very driven and very organized person, as well as someone that can gather support for that type of initiative. I think that's fabulous. And I think that my vision and my projection is that in the United States we're broken up into 50 different states, and each state kind of has its jurisdiction. So some states are very lenient, not necessarily lenient that you can cook whatever you want in a bad safety way, but sometimes you can sell, and you can have a facility that's, less regulated as another place. But I think that the local, state governments, I think that when they start seeing the the efforts that freeze drying is going through to be a safe preservation method, and it can retain the nutritional value, the impact that that could have to starvation across the world, as well as keeping food at a low cost when it's very expensive for fresh produce. That's really awesome. So I want to ask you then, how was there was freeze drying already in the government, like, being looked at, or is this relatively new that you're getting these grants approved?
So it's pretty new. I would say only in the last 5 years that the government has started exploring basically ways of preserving food at farm. So the larger projects that have been focused on are dehydration. I think it's also to do with the fact that it's a much cheaper technology in comparison to freeze drying. But also, I would say, as someone whose background has been climate change overall, I would say climate is another driver for the government. They do understand that climates are changing across every state. And how do you make sure with the changing climates, there is not too much sort of over dependency on how crops will change every season. And there is that backup, in terms of just having food security. So I would say that's a much larger conversation. But like you said, freeze drying and dehydration, all these technologies where no preservatives are involved, play a huge role in food security, which many people don't talk about.
I'm not familiar with India in terms of what the weather's like, but is it very humid there? So moisture is a very large part of keeping that moisture out of your environment. So what's the climate like in where you're at in India, and how do you manage that when you're doing freeze drying?
So I'm in New Delhi. So generally about 7 to 8 months of the year, it's pretty humid and pretty hot. It's more tropical. And about 4 months, like you can see, I'm wearing winter wear right now. So about 4 months, it gets pretty cold because New Delhi is much closer to the Himalayas. So we do have the northern India go into winters versus the southern part of India is generally tropical throughout the year. There are only some breezy winds for a few months, but it's pretty humid and hot across the year. It's one aspect, like you said, the technology is not just for the fact that it has to remove moisture. It's for the fact that retort and other technologies, the canning technologies which you mentioned before, do end up, taking some flavor aspect out of it. So, of course, you mentioned how there's a flavor enhancing aspect to freeze drying, but aroma, colors, all these things do go a little haywire when it comes to canning technologies. Overall, if you looked at cooked food, there is a certain taste on the background. Versus in freeze drying, there is no change in aroma, taste, color, as well as nutrition to a point. From my understanding, about only 5 to 8% loss in nutrition is what happens in freeze drying. Would love to hear on that from you.
I want to ask you about the turmeric, the spice that makes, you use a lot of that. So I'm curious if that does that change much color at all?
No, just 2 weeks back, we actually did this experiment for someone where we freeze dried hardcore turmeric. So we got fresh turmeric, we just sliced it up and freeze dried it, and it came out as it is. There was no change in color, nothing.
Yeah, freeze drying, in terms of the way that the process allows you to control vacuum, and you also want to control the heat as well, and that will really dictate exactly what your end product will be. In fact, I was talking to an individual that does pet treats and pet food, and he was freeze drying, some liver and some other byproducts, and for pet treats. And the difference in and what he had been used to been freeze drying was he kept freeze drying the meat and it was changing colorization, and that's all he knew. It was changing to more of like a gray. It definitely looked cooked. It was a gray kind of texture, but he started using a different freeze dryer, and it actually stayed pink from the original, kind of blood and liver type look and feel. And it was still dried, and he still dried it even faster than before. And all that had to do with it was controlling the cooling and also the vacuum and the heat that he was doing in the process. And so it's just a good example that freeze drying doesn't necessarily, there's a huge customization when it comes to making sure that one, you get the right taste, and also that the texture comes out the way you want it, because candies and fruits can become very delicate, and it can be super delicious in terms of melting in your mouth, but also can be very fragile, and it doesn't have to be as fragile as you think it. Sometimes you can be more delicate with the pressure and the sublimation, which sublimation is just the removal of the moisture. And so if you're more delicate with how that process is going through vacuum, then the strawberry's not as like a powder upon dropping it, or a powder behind that. So it's really fascinating how freeze drying can be customized based on how you want the product to look, taste, and feel. And especially when you're shipping products, I usually, like you are, globally, you really need something that can hold up even in that package, so that it's not super crushed, or doesn't look uh, displeasing to someone who's buying it, right?
For example, while shipping globally, one of the issues we had initially was rice. So, rice was breaking into this powdery form, and given India has over, I would say, 50 to 80 plus varieties of rice, we ended up doing R&D with, I remember, 45 types of rice, and making sure each of them was boiled at certain temperatures, and also controlling the vacuum and the temperature inside the machines. And then we came down to one kind of rice which we realized is actually doing well while shipping and not getting crushed into powder. So it's amazing how automated these machines are right now.
50 to 80 types of rice. I'm used to just jasmine rice. That's all I do. That and brown rice. Uh, something popped into my head. I usually more about spices, because I actually love Indian food. Now, you probably look at what I'm eating and say, "Oh, that is nothing authentic at all." But I do like that. I like trying different foods, and my palate is great for that. I mean, I don't have a distaste for it, but I was curious. Usually when I go to an Indian restaurant, they give you kind of some spice levels, but I'm curious. Do you put a certain level of spiciness in your 80 different products? And if you do, did it take a while to experiment on how that would impact through the freeze drying process?
So I remember the vendor we were using for chili specifically. We realized after freeze drying, chili was just sort of going away. There was no chili left after freeze drying. So one, we had to change our vendor, and the second, we had to adjust our spice levels because there was a little more enhancement, like we talked about. So the chili was increasing post freeze drying. So we had to adjust all our recipes to the gram to understand how do we actually make it, a little more palatable in terms of less spice and salt. Because especially once you travel abroad, your day-to-day spice levels really go down because people abroad don't eat such spicy food. So you get used to eating low spice food. So we had to make less spicy food, and we had to change our recipes. What we had in dehydration versus freeze drying, it just changed overall because the spices were reacting very differently in both the technologies.
I think this would be a good time to talk about packaging because I mean, you could probably ask me questions too, but you know, did it take a while? Have you found the packaging that you see your company using for for the long term here, or are you still experimenting with different types of packaging?
Absolutely. First of all, I would love to learn from you, but just from our experience, the larger concept of freeze drying is that it doesn't go bad or there's no microbial or fungal growth because there's no access to moisture, light, and air. So when it comes to these three things, you have to consider these three things while choosing your packaging, and that's where we decided to go for aluminium-based packaging. So I have a five-layer sort of package here. So if you can see, of course, from outside, it just looks like a simple packet, but it has over five layers. So PET, MedPET, then aluminium, then there are two more layers. And the larger sort of concept being how do you, cut off light, moisture, and air. And when it comes to, still looking out, as I said, my background is in the climate space, so I'm always looking for something biodegradable. It's just that most of them are highly porous, so the cutoff to light and air is not a possibility in compostable materials, at least as of now. But would love to learn from you.
I'm just getting into my connections with packaging. I've had the same questions for a long time, and I agree with you that those three components of light, oxygen, and moisture are the three things that can really impact the 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 durability and the shelf life of freeze dried food. Obviously, moisture, as long as you have your moisture activity at below the acceptable point where bacteria is not going to grow because of that moisture, then now you're just left with the two other pieces, which is keeping out sunlight, especially if you're going to have it stored in a huge warehouse or you're going to have it stored in a displayed in different retail locations. You have to have something like aluminum foil that keeps that light out, and it has to be, I've heard, 5 to even 7 layer thickness. And so I think you're obviously on the right track. The other piece is the oxygen piece, and I think it's like it really depends on how much you're packing the material into your product. That product that you showed right there, it seems like it's you don't have much room for oxygen, that you have to compensate with an oxygen absorber or a desiccant packet at all. That seems to be what people are playing around with the most. In the candies side, I think candies is still very much open. Like it's a very open topic right now because what's really cool about candies is the sugar molecular makeup of certain candies allows the candy in a vacuum to pop and it becomes crunchy. It's really fun. And so if any of your viewers or my viewers have never seen that, it's very common in the United States, but it's just a new flavor. So if you can't chew on candies and it's very gummy and you don't like that, freeze dried candy freeze dried candy is now crunchy. Do you have some of that yourself?
Yes, that's why I looked away. So we do ice cream actually. This is a very, very popular ice cream in India. It's called cassata ice cream. So basically, it's vanilla, strawberry, and a few other flavors mixed up, but we do ice cream. So absolutely on board with what you're saying. Please continue.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that in terms of packaging for candy, um, what we're seeing in the U.S. is that some of the larger brands of candy making, Mars Wrigley, who makes brands like Skittles and M&Ms, things like that. They're getting into freeze-dried caramel M&Ms, freeze-dried Skittles. They have their own product now, which a lot of people, including myself, were freeze drying their candy. Um, but also, Hershey, they make a hard candy called Jolly Ranchers. It's like it's a hard candy that you suck on and you get the flavor. But in the freeze dryer, it pops to be almost like a malt ball, so it just melts in your mouth and the flavor hits immediately. It's really good. The thing that I've been very curious of is how those large companies, one, are going to produce a lot of that candy at a quality level, and then number two, how are they going to ship all that product in because it's so delicate, because a Jolly Rancher, it expands, but as soon as you pop it in your mouth, it dissolves. It's like a powder. So for the end user, getting that package on a shelf at a store or even buying it online and it's in transit, it's very susceptible for it to be crushed. And so I think you almost I always thought of this idea, Ayush. Maybe you'd be a good person to bounce off of, but I thought for durability of delicate products, you almost have a foil aluminum bag, that's but you also have an interior, more durable bag inside there, and you're actually doing nitrogen extract a nitrogen gas inside it, just like a potato chip bag. And so inside there, when you open it up, you have a secondary bag in there that kind of is there. But I don't know if that would work. What do you think?
So I would say main thing it goes down to creating some sort of structure. So that's why we have a hard structure here. That way, even while shipping, even if there's pressure, it's not going on to the product directly. But of course, this is not aluminium again, like you can say. See, this is sort of food grade plastic that is it's being packed in. So like you said, it will be possibly some kind of pouch with a structure to it. That way, when there's some pressure, it doesn't go bad. I would say nitrogen flushing or not, of course, the oxygen scavengers are there, so that shouldn't be an issue in general. So that I think it still needs a lot of work, but there has to be some structure so that there's no pressure on the product direct.
Yeah, going back to having being thoughtful of the environment and what we're actually producing at the Freeze Dried Summit, which was a conference that I organized this past September, and actually I just announced tickets for the next year. But there was an individual that was there that was looking for packaging, and I suggested some things, and he's like, "Yeah, I looked at wood pulp type manufactured packaging." That type of thing. But he said it still doesn't actually biodegrade. It's not something that actually is compostable at all. And so I was telling him, I said, if you find that company that can do that, I almost wouldn't even share who that company is, because I think a lot of people are very much environmental conscious and kind of want to care about that. But I'm sure those companies are out there, but they're very kept in a secret safe.
Absolutely. I hope they reach out to us. One of my other sort of ways of understanding if this is happening is the pharma space, right? Pharma, of course, pharmaceuticals use a lot of freeze drying when it comes to vaccines, and they still add glass bottles. So that means they haven't sort of understood what's another way to stabilize freeze-dried food from sort of keep it away from the three pointers we talked about. So hopefully there is a point on it. But just sort of going back to the freeze-dried space, I would love to know from you on, what kind of products. You did talk about candies, but what other products are being focused on in the freeze-dried space in the US?
Yeah, I think the most established, largest market for freeze drying of the companies that I personally have connected with, as well as that I'm connected with in a more of a virtual sense through social media, is pet food. Pet food is a huge industry, because a lot of us care about our pets and what we're feeding them. Pets generally don't live as long as humans, obviously, so there's more frequency of you having pets and caring about that. So there's a lot of money to be made with companies in that space, and nutrition is such a huge thing with that. And I'm not as familiar with that industry in terms of what the process is like, but in the US it's a very regulated industry. So, but that's a growing industry. I'd say, secondly, what's most commonly to people is the fruit and produce side of freeze dried fruit, and I think that's growing exponentially. The other area that I think is huge is the nutraceutical supplements and getting different types of produce and plants and refining that into a very fine powder and encapsulating it or making it into a powder to have in your coffee or your smoothie or your morning shake, that type of thing. Huge opportunity, I believe, because again, freeze drying allows you to maintain the highest level of nutrition after it's dried out. And when you have that high of a dosage of, let's say, broccoli powder or some type of cabbage or some type of fruit, and you, even for kids, Ayushi, like it's really hard to get my kids to eat the produce and the veggies and all those type of things. But if you just sprinkle it over something that they normally eat, they may not even know it, but you've just given them a day's worth of nutrition. So I think that that is going to be a huge market.
100%. I've seen even protein companies in India sort of using freeze-dried strawberries, freeze-dried pineapple, and other ways to sort of sweeten their whey proteins. So I would say nutraceuticals is another huge area where people are talking about a different kind of herbs. How do you have these herbs? Because consuming them fresh is very difficult versus consuming them in a capsule, which is a freeze-dried powder. Absolutely makes sense.
Ayushi, in terms of the freeze drying business landscape in the US, it's grown a lot because of the home freeze dryer. It's a tabletop size. But in India, is startups in freeze drying starting to be something that you're seeing more and more in India, or is it still a financial barrier and there's not as many people getting into it as it is in the US?
So first of all, a lot of people, I believe, Harvest Right is still not selling in India. So there are not a lot of home machines, even if people can afford it. A few people I know who have their Harvest Right machines have imported it, which is extremely expensive. And then over the last just 6 to 8 months, I've seen because we do a lot of job work as well. We support a lot of startups. Given I do have large capacities on helping them start their ideas where they focus on marketing versus on production. So I've seen an uptake of mushroom-based startups. So nutraceuticals, again, in a way. How do you incorporate mushrooms into your daily life from a health perspective? And the second is coffee. So coffee is growing, of course. We've all had instant coffee all our life, and majority is freeze dried. Most people didn't know the Nestle coffee is freeze dried. But now people have started looking into freeze drying their cold brew coffees. How could you have instant cold brew, for example? So those two are areas that I am seeing an uptake in. And then, of course, the experiments keep going on.
What other countries in your area of the world do you see um, growing in freeze drying as well?
So Thailand is much ahead of us in general. So Thailand has been doing mangoes, mangosteen, like strawberries, anything and everything. I do not know a lot of Canadian importers as well as US based importers who are importing their candies actually from Thailand. So the Mars and the Hershey's candies are being freeze dried in Thailand. So if I said India was at X in terms of freeze drying, I would say Thailand is possibly at 5X, 10X when it comes to freeze drying overall, and especially when it comes to raw fruits.
Yeah, and I'm sure the supply over there is much cheaper than trying to get oranges and pineapples and things down here in Florida or California, all that type of thing. So yeah. Um, I have a question with like peanuts and things like that, like nuts. Is Do you feel like there's any application with all the varieties of nuts around the world? I know that does it make sense to freeze dry nuts into a powder or to do those types of things? Have you seen or explored that at all?
So we did experiment with fresh almonds. Uh, so India does have fresh almonds in general, so not the dried version of almonds. So that did make sense, but we did because as a company we are very focused on food, so we couldn't find an application as of yet. At least for we just did that experiment for future uses. But I would say when it comes to dry fruits, there's a possibility at farm, but at this point, again, um, the reality is that freeze drying is amazing, but it requires a larger shift in mentality, right? Like people are not ready to understand the technology first. So, paying for that almond or for that any nut of that kind, there will be an extra cost attached to it to what we are getting in the market, and only there'll be only a small percentage who'll actually be ready to buy it. So because no one's ready to sort of deep dive into the technology and understand the pros of it.
As the consumer, it takes a while for something to be um, a common, staple for even just people who are open to different types of food. And I think about, especially in the kid market, you know, it's such a very scrutinized food area because you want one that's something that's going to be safe for kids to actually eat, that they're not going to choke on. You also don't want a whole lot of sugars that are additives to that. You also have a lot of allergies that you have to be cognizant of. At the same time, you want them to eat healthy and get all the nutrition so they can grow in a healthy way. And I think about all the different pouches right now that you can, transport and do all those things. And I think that's only probably in the past, 15 years or so that, a different type of packaging is what has taken off at a certain category. And so with freeze drying, bringing back packaging, I think the way that a freeze dried product is packaged for a consumer is going to dictate how those categories are going to take off. Because sometimes freeze dried food meals don't look that, they don't like, visually they don't look that appealing, but they still taste good. So it's going to take a while for consumers to taste all of the different types of freeze dried. And also, I think it's up to companies like yourself who, you know, maybe that's what you really care about as a company, and you want to focus on the look and the feel and the coloring because that's what consumers will want. So
100%. Finally, it's the visual aspect, sort of on shelves, right, that make us pick up any packet of any sector. So I agree with you over there, and I hope that as we grow, as other companies grow, there is a little more investment towards how these products look. There's a little more investment towards educating people on the product as well, so that the final product comes out to be, after adding water, it comes out to be perfect, and they understand the larger product concept.
I think we could probably close with maybe you and I both talking about what we think the future outlook for freeze drying looks like. We kind of talked about that in terms of, what I'm seeing in the US and things, but in terms of my perspective on where the future holds, I really do think that nutraceuticals and specialty type foods is going to be the name of the game, and I think also freeze drying safely and having different freeze dryers, the technology being something that a company like yourself can control to keep things food safe, as the global economy grows in freeze drying is going to be a huge factor. So, I think if you looked back 10 years ago, there was only a handful of freeze drying companies and it was very expensive. Now, with the home freeze dryers and all different types of companies developing things, now it comes down to companies like yourself and owners looking at the different companies and saying, we care about, just production. Like, how much can this thing do? Other companies are going to say, I want something that is so food safe that I don't have any question that no bacteria is getting in there. Or you want, also the specialty side of things. I mean, if you're going to try to do a powder, you have to have a freeze dryer that can process that liquid and freeze it in a very cold way. So I think that that's where things are headed in my side of things. So what do you feel like the future in freeze drying?
So I feel like it's just the starting. Freeze drying is just picking up, and over the next 10 years, David, it's going to change so much, and it's become going to become like a household sort of technology that people talk about or adopt globally. Because, like you said, it's something it's so food safe that you don't have to add any, you don't have to be a scientist, food scientist, to actually take up the technology, right? It's just that um, I personally think, at least from my perspective, that we are seeing such a big uptake in the US, in Canada, in UK, in Dubai, where we are working with so many buyers who are picking up our products, who are white labeling it or selling it as it is. And there are so many communities which are work driven, that are adopting clean meals on a daily basis, that it's just going to grow. And I know after 10 years, David, you and I are going to probably have this conversation again and talk about how much it's grown over the last 10 years.
Yeah, hopefully we get to meet in person at some point in the coming years. My last question, Ayushi, is a lot of the viewership on my channel is people that are aspiring to start a freeze drying business. Some maybe they've been doing freeze drying and they've been doing the same product and they're just maybe getting burned out, or they're just, they're seeing a lot of people getting into freeze drying. What encouragement and ad, what advice would you give to people who, just like yourself, started out, you're starting to see more competition, things like that? What advice and motivation would you give those people who want to continue in this space?
Absolutely. The biggest thing I would say is be patient, be innovative, and like me, anything and everything that I interact with, I put in the freeze dryer. So anything I end up eating, the first thing I think is, how is it going to do in my freeze dryer? And I would say study the market. There is always a market of people who require a certain product. So keep going. The best part is, in the machine you can do anything, right? You can freeze dry anything, versus it's not like a machine that has so many restrictions to it. So keep going, keep trying. There is a market for everything and everything, anything. Just be patient with it.
Well, we've been talking with Ayushi from DryM Foods in New Delhi, India, and we really appreciate you being on this podcast. If you want to know anything about what she's doing and maybe even contact her directly, she's very responsive on Instagram. Go to Instagram and look up DryM Foods. You can also, I'm going to put a link in the video description of this video and interview as well. And you can go directly see what they're doing, buy some product, see what you think of it. She is selling online, so you can buy the product right now and get it no matter where you're at. And Ayushi, I hope so that we're able to meet at some point. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for having me on the podcast, and I hope to host you in India soon.